and welcome to the News Minute. I am Dhanya Rajendran. Delimitation is once again in the news, but is the only solution to the problem South Indians making more babies? Let's talk to a politician who has been speaking about delimitation for quite some time now. He's been calling for a southern consciousness. Joining me today is Congress leader and Lok Sabha member from Kerala, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, before I come to you, I want to just remind the audiences that the News Minute is a completely ad-free platform. We are dependent on readers like you, your subscription money. So do become a subscriber and enjoy more interviews like this. Mr. Tharoor, my first question to you is that Chandrababu Naidu, the Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister, and MK Stalin have spoken about the population of South India. Of course, Stalin spoke rhetorically, but Naidu has been asking people to produce more babies. Is
Yeah.
that really the solution that we are looking to solve the problem of delimitation?
Well, I think it, first of all, is not really a solution. But secondly, there are objective reasons why people have fewer children, including the fact that human development has made remarkable progress in the South. And so you're looking at a situation where people are able to look after the children they've got better, to keep them alive, to feed them, educate them, and so on. And therefore, they don't have that compulsion to have more children. And this is something which is a natural process of human development. And in the case of India as a whole, this is going to be the trend even in other states. But if Naidu and Stalin are trying to address the specific crisis that is looming for the southern states when the 84th Amendment lapses in 2026, and suddenly demography will cost them political clout in addition to the financial losses they've already suffered with the last finance commission, then their solution is far too slow and far too modest to actually solve anything. Because this is happening very soon. I think the government may well deliberately have delayed the census of 2021 in order to let it happen soon after the lapsing of the constitutional amendment in 2026. Just by way of background for your listeners, the constitutional amendment actually goes back to the 42nd Amendment or 40, yeah, in 1976, when Indira Gandhi, in order not to reward those states that were failing to control their population, essentially said we're going to freeze the Lok Sabha representation of all states at the 1971 census, which at that point was the most recent census. And that actually helped curb population because the southern states continued in that trend of reducing significantly their populations, whereas in the north, I'm afraid, the slowing down of population growth was much, much more modest in the early days. In 2001, the Vajpayee government decided that this was actually not a bad thing to persist with, and they unanimously renewed that amendment in Parliament in 2001 for another 25 years. So that's why we have now what is the 84th Amendment, which is going to lapse 25 years after Mr. Vajpayee's amendment, that is in 2026. Now, in 2026, if the present government, then make sure they hold a census after that, then they can immediately redistribute parliament seats until, before the 2029 elections. Already, they will be able to empower the states where they are strong and somewhat disempower the South. And that kind of political calculation may well be in the back of their minds in deferring or delaying the census for this long. This is the kind of concern that many southern states have. Now, of course, Mr. Naidu would be in the cabinet, but so far, neither he nor any of the other cabinet partners of Mr. Modi have shown any assertiveness. And this almost facetious suggestion of having more children does not suggest a serious engagement yet with the fundamental issues involved in the question that comes up: what happens if, after a new census, UP has more MPs post delimitation than all the southern states put together? If the Hindi-speaking states collectively can pass any constitutional amendment with a two-thirds majority, where would it leave our federalism? And this is something that many states are seriously concerned about. So this is the issue in a nutshell, Dhanya. And having more children is not the answer, at least not the short-term answer to this problem. There are
So
other answers we can discuss.
Let me just make it very clear to those watching that MK Stalin did not suggest having more babies. He actually rhetorically said that he actually recalled a Tamil saying and said that when we look at problems like delimitation, it occurs to us that why should we not then have 16 children? He was not actually asking people to have 16 children, but Naidu has been saying that. In fact, I've been looking at previous news reports. He's been saying that from 2015. Though the thing that he talks about is that Andhra Pradesh has a lot of aging population. Now, Mr.
It's
Tharoor, my
actually
next.
more serious than that. Had
Hmm.
there been a 2021 census, Kerala would have been the first state in the country to actually record a loss in population since the 2011 census. And Andhra Pradesh would have been very close behind, and possibly by 2031, Andhra Pradesh would also show a loss in population. So they are actually declining. In fact, it's very interesting that the northern states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and UP, all of which, of course, are states where the BJP considers itself fairly strong, had a decadal population growth of over 20% between 2001 and 2011, which is about 2% a year. Whereas Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, the undivided old state, because we didn't have any Telangana in the 2011 census, so the undivided Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu cumulatively grew at less than 1.6% at that time. And Kerala already then, in 2011, had the country's lowest growth rate, 4.9% over a whole decade, which is less than half a percent a year. Now, that's one fifth of Bihar's growth rate. And so, if you're looking at this whole thing in a bigger context, since Indira Gandhi passed that amendment, Kerala's population has grown at 56% since 1971. And I'm referring up to 2011 because those are the only official figures we have. Tamil Nadu's grew by 75%, but Rajasthan's grew at 166%, Bihar's grew 146%, UP's grew 132%. And these are already more popular states. Now, in the long term, as I said earlier, all these numbers may one day converge because family sizes are going down everywhere, but the divergences are right now set to continue. Currently, Tamil Nadu's fertility rate is 1.6, UP's is 3, Bihar's is 3.2. So, very clearly, the gap is going to widen before it shrinks.
So, in the southern states, are we also looking at a problem like, for example, a Japan or a China has, where they have to ask people to have more babies because of the aging population? Like Naidu has been saying, the average population, age of the population is also increasing in Andhra Pradesh.
So, what the BJP would probably answer, though I've not heard a BJP spokesman say this, I'm putting words in their mouth, is that why can't these states that are losing people simply import them from the states that are gaining people? Why can't you get more Biharis and UPites and so on to come and settle in your states and work? And the thing is, the worry that some of the southern states have is, will they come and bring with them their language, their way of being, and so on, or will they make an effort to assimilate into the local cultures? And this is again a tough question. I mean, I have frankly met many people from the northern states who have been working in Kerala for 10, 12 years and who don't know a word of Malayalam. Now, that's not necessarily the only way, because there's also a story I was very proud of telling a few years ago when the student who came first in the statewide Malayalam examinations was the son of a Bihari chai shop owner who had migrated from Bihar and set up a tea shop outside a railway station. And his son, I think his name was Muhammad Mohsin, came first in the entire state of Kerala in Malayalam. So there are exceptions like that too. But these are the kinds of concerns we have. You see, because what would why should Kerala be punished for its impressive performance by receiving less revenue from the Finance Commission and also losing seats in Parliament, thereby being forced to dilute its voice in national affairs? And why should Tamil Nadu's reward for extraordinary economic success, sustained growth, and population control be lower tax revenues from the center and fewer opportunities to have its voice heard in Parliament? Now, to these, there is, if you like, a classic sort of textbook answer, which is that those are the rules of democracy. One person means one vote, means the more persons you have, the more people you have, the more political clout and more tax rupees you should get. But I would argue, Dhanya, and I have been arguing for some time, including in the News Minute, that in a country like ours, whose diversity is held together by a sense of common belonging, but which must accommodate a range of states with divergent levels of development, as well as different cultures and languages, it's essential that all feel that their common nationhood is a winning proposition for them. It doesn't hurt what matters to them, it doesn't dilute what they consider the essence of their identity. And in a country like ours, where regional, religious, linguistic tensions are never far from the surface, you can't just say we have more people, so we'll have more money and more power, because that really risks rupturing the bonds that hold us all together. It's a very serious issue. I mean, I must say, if suddenly a two-thirds majority of Hindi speakers decides to just pass a constitutional amendment saying Hindi will be the national language, how do you think Tamil Nadu will react? And why do you want to create a situation where Tamil Nadu has no opportunity to block such a thing through any constitutional means? This is why I believe we really need to address this question seriously. I would urge strongly that the Southern chief ministers should all get together and formulate a common approach, and that these should be discussed in Parliament by 2026. Because the lapsing of the amendment is inevitable. No one can change that. That's happening. And the BJP has absolutely no desire to do a Vajpayee and renew the amendment. So, in those circumstances, you need alternative solutions. One solution might be a constitutional one, by creating, for example, a different structure for the Rajya Sabha. So, say, okay, the Lok Sabha will be expanded to accommodate these more populous states' representatives, for example. But if you do that, simultaneously, you will calibrate the composition of the Rajya Sabha in such a way that you will give, if you like, more weightage to the less populous but more otherwise successful states in human development, the southern states, and so on. Now, this is, as you know, what happens in America, where there are 50 states and every state has the same two senators, even though in the House of Congress, the lower house, the equivalent to the Lok Sabha, it's population that determines the strength of each state's delegation in the House. But the state is able thereby to protect its interests in the Senate by having the same. So a tiny state like Rhode Island or Delaware has the same two senators as a hugely populous California, which may be 15, 20 times its size in terms of population. So if we could say, all right, Kerala will have the same number of Rajya Sabha MPs as UP, even though UP has 5 times more MPs in the Lok Sabha, that might be a solution. But all these require serious consideration, discussion, emergence of a political consensus, and a unanimous constitutional amendment. This is the kind of change that should not be done with a pure technical exercise of having a census and doing a delimitation and confronting the South with a fait accompli, because that could really, really threaten the unity and the political peace in our country.
So I have a lot of follow-up questions from what you said. You're suggesting that the Rajya Sabha, perhaps one solution is that there's a US Senate model. Now, the first thing is delimitation is an exercise that is very much needed. For example, the North India does require more Lok Sabha MPs because the representation per person is low as of now. But balancing that is what is difficult. Now, all that you spoke about, is that politically really achievable considering the BJP is bulldozing things in the parliament?
Well, one of the things we hope is that when it comes to these issues, the BJP's willingness to risk shaking up its own coalition might give it some pause. We've seen some so-called U-turns that have taken place in the course of the first 6 months of the BJP's new government. You remember on the lateral entry thing, how quickly they pulled their circular. And that was because, indeed, some of their own coalition partners joined the opposition in saying this was not a good idea to bypass caste reservations in lateral entry. Similarly, there's a decision to refer the Waqf bill to a joint parliamentary committee rather than just bulldoze it through. So there have been some changes in the BJP's approach, perhaps not enough, but at least they've shown some reasonableness. And I would like to think that if we all, in a constructive way, point out to them the dangers inherent in this particular course of action, the BJP might be willing to at least have a serious consultation. I think this is a matter that requires a couple of days serious discussion in Parliament, as plus ideally really going into it in great detail in a parliamentary standing committee or a joint parliamentary committee, because this is far more important for the South than people realize. Let's face it. We've seen a number of episodes where the South is not getting the kind of money that they believe they deserve, and certainly much less than what they are themselves contributing to the national exchequer. But they've been keeping their grumbling quiet because, by and large, there is an acceptance of the fact that we are more prosperous, so we should subsidize the less prosperous states. But when Chief Minister Siddharamaiah said once, "Where is the reward for development?" and he was pointing out to the fact that for every 1 rupee of tax contributed by UP, that state receives 1 rupee 79 paise from the central government. Whereas for every 1 rupee of tax contributed by Karnataka, the state receives less than 50 paise, 47 paise. So Karnataka says, okay, fair enough. We have to subsidize some of these northern states, but where is our reward? How long can we keep incentivizing population growth? Karnataka, for example, meets 72% of its expenses from the state's own taxes, whereas Bihar just has to cover 23% of their expenses. 77 comes from central taxes. So the argument that some critics have been making, and there are some people already working on this issue, Dhanya, is that India's revenues are going disproportionately to its worst performing states, which is the opposite of most federal systems in the world. So the states with poor levels of education, high rates of fertility, high rates of population growth are getting more and more rewards from the center for being like that. Whereas the states that are doing well in these areas, in education, in women's empowerment, in controlling population, and so on, the high performance states, as the South likes to think of themselves, they are getting short shrift. And this is something which ultimately is going to breed some resentment unless you anticipate the problem and nip it in the bud with the kind of solutions that you can come up with.
But does the BJP not have a political incentive to go ahead? Because then the Hindi belt states will definitely have more seats, especially Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and all the other states. But I did read an article in which you said that after the Uttar Pradesh, after the Lok Sabha results and how the BJP performed in Uttar Pradesh, you believe that they may backtrack on how delimitation stands now. Why is this optimism?
No, it's not optimism. It's just saying it's a caveat. My argument is still what I've expressed to you. But if indeed they're feeling that this is not going to be a benefit for the BJP, then they would probably want to backtrack. But I don't think that they're going to be like that, because we've already seen now, for example, with Haryana, how they were able to pull back in the state assembly of what they had lost in the Lok Sabha. So they're quite capable of feeling for themselves that the Hindi belt is theirs, and by empowering the Hindi belt, they will be the most likely to reap the rewards. Now, there are again two kinds of ways you can do this. You can keep the numbers roughly where they are now, and that means you would have to reduce some seats for some states, like the southern states, and increase the seats, but all within the existing total. But the second option is you say, we won't reduce anybody's seats so you don't feel bad, but we'll increase the seats of those whose population has gone up. And that will give you perhaps an 800-member Lok Sabha, which would be a travesty of democracy, because you cannot, as it is with 543, many people don't get a chance to participate meaningfully in debates. With 800 plus, we're going to be like the Chinese People's Consultative Committee. You've seen these news clips where Xi Jinping walks in and delivers a monologue, and everybody dutifully thumps their desks or applauds. I mean, that is not, to my mind, what Indian democracy should be looking for. So we have to have a reasonable ceiling for the Lok Sabha so it can still be an effective organ. And we have to think in terms of imaginative constitutional solutions so that no one region of our country gets essentially the right to ride roughshod over everybody else, amend the constitution in their own sweet will, and so on. So, I think that we really need to be able to convey through Parliament the sentiments of the people of the South to those of the people of the North. And I think the people of the North will understand this to some degree. Yes, there are people who don't understand it. There are many, many people who say, why can't you speak Hindi? It's our language. And I said, well, it may be the language of yours. It's not the language that I learned in my mother's lap. It's not the language, we had this three-language formula, which has been honored in the breach in the North. How many UP school children are learning Tamil or Malayalam? Whereas indeed there are Malayali school children learning Hindi, but certainly Tamil Nadu is very wary of allowing Hindi to encroach into their public spaces and their classrooms. So we are unnecessarily, I think, provoking a level of hostility and division, which honestly the country doesn't need.
Hmm. So I think one problem is that we actually don't know what the BJP is thinking. I've hardly heard anyone in the BJP speak about delimitation, whether they are from southern India or northern India. They don't ever address this problem, right? So we don't know what they're thinking. And you also talked about the southern consciousness. Now, for a few years now, southern chief ministers have been meeting, southern finance ministers have been meeting. But why have we not been able to bring this discussion more to the table?
I think it's starting gradually. We're coming to the end of 24. I think in the course of 25, as the imminence of the lapsing of the amendment comes up, I think there will be more conversations. And to my mind, already these statements about having more population is a reflection of that. We're going to have there's many states in the south are very unhappy about the number of rupees they have lost in the last finance commission. The next finance commission might even be worse for them. So I think there's going to be much more consciousness of saying, to what degree can population imbalance govern the rewards that the central government gives to all states? And a state like Kerala, it may be sort of admirable in many respects in terms of population control, women's empowerment, but the state is essentially broke. It's head over heels in debt. It is the second largest debt in the country. So how can Kerala afford to think of itself as a state that can just take all this in stride when in fact it's hurting? It's hurting the state not to get the kind of money that they're used to getting in the past from the central government. On top of that, as you know, the BJP has come up with a very clever device of central cesses. A cess is not technically a tax. And so they are taxing the Indian public more and more through cesses. But cesses do not go into the divisible pool of revenues, which have to be shared with the states. So every cess we pay, highway cess, petrol cess, diesel cess, all of these cess, education cess, all these cesses just stay with the central government. They can allocate it as they wish. And the southern states feel they're not getting a fair share of this either. So there are some issues. I'm not, I'm somebody who feels I'm very deeply invested in the idea of India. I'm somebody who has grown up all over the country, Dhanya. I went to school in Bombay, high school in Calcutta, college in Delhi. I'm from the south. I represent Kerala. So I want you to believe very, very sincerely that for me, keeping India united is genuinely important. And I feel invested in India's unity. But I feel all the more reason why it is important to warn those who would be cavalier about this not to take our unity for granted. Because more and more I worry that if they act as if they can take it for granted, some in the South might well start turning around and saying, why do we want to stay in an India that denies us all our rights? We don't need that situation.
Hmm.
We must have a more decentralized democracy, one in which the central share of tax resources is not so crucial and the political authority of New Delhi is not so overwhelming. Let's, for example, have a more devolution of powers to the states, so the states don't feel that the center, can ride roughshod over their interests on matters that affect them and their culture, their identity, their language, and so on. For
Hmm.
example, let's say the central government in a new federal arrangement no longer has the right to declare a national language and impose it on Tamil Nadu, then Tamil Nadu has nothing to worry about. If you can keep a larger percentage of your tax revenues, you've much less to complain about. For Karnataka, if you can have a certain number of seats in the central parliament, but also have a strong state assembly with more powers than the present state assemblies have, then again you have nothing to worry about. So look, the South is, as I said, speaking of myself, but I think generally the South is both literally and metaphorically invested in the North, and therefore in the collective idea of India, and we're all proud of it. But India should be pluralist, equitable, inclusive. It's supposed to be a union of states, as Rahul Gandhi has often reminded us in Parliament, and therefore allowing any divisive trends to fester into problems is not in India's interest. I think that's my strong message to all those listening.
I want to just ask two more political questions. The first is that I was reading your column in the Hindu soon after the May 2024 Lok Sabha elections, in which you sort of welcomed the fact that it is a coalition government, and you wrote that these coalition parties perhaps may keep the BJP on a short leash and stench the tide of the Hindutva project. But you also said that you believe they may not rally around cooperative federalism. Now, my question to you is look at what happened with the Tirupati Laddu issue, right? We
Yeah,
saw that the TDP pushed a Hindutva agenda perhaps more than the BJP did at that time. So,
correct.
could we really back on these parties, including the TDP in the South? And second, why do you believe that they won't rally around cooperative federalism except for their own interests?
Because they haven't shown any signs of doing so. In fact, what worries me about the first 6 months is how little these people have asserted themselves, except Chirag Paswan's party asserting itself on caste issues, as did Nitish Kumar's party, and Chandrababu Naidu's party signaling its dissent on the Waqf board issue and urging it go to a committee. Apart from those issues, can you think of anything on which they've actually stood up to the government? They're much, much more concerned about seeing how can we get more money out of the government, and that's all they seem to be actually interested in. So I worry that if their thinking is entirely short term, let's see what benefits we can get from being part of this government, and let us not therefore have to worry at all about other issues. Then I do worry whether they can be an effective voice for cooperative federalism. Yeah, as it is, this cooperative federalism has become a bit of a joke because the government seems to expect all the states to cooperate, but the central government simply operates as it wishes and its own sweet whims. So I must say that that is, to my mind, a genuine concern as well. Um, but I did hope, you're right, in that piece in the Hindu just after the elections, I said, I hope this will revitalize our beleaguered federal structure. But I have seen and I've pointed out to a very many large number of signs to the contrary from the government's conduct. And so the question now is, what will put a brake on that? One might be Southern unity. If all the Southern states can get together and say, look, this is important to us, you have to meet with us, you have to listen to us. That could certainly be a factor. Um, but if the BJP says, okay, given our demographic realities, here's a great opportunity to give the Hindi speaking states of the cow belt a two-thirds majority and disenfranchise the southern states in order to get a permanent stranglehold on our parliament. That, I think, would lead to a severe crisis of our democracy as well as our federalism. And that's the issue.
So we keep saying southern states, right? How do you think the Congress, what do you think the stand of the Congress will be? For example, the Congress also stands to gain if the party strengthens in the northern states, right? And the states are more there. So as a party, what do you believe the Congress's stand would be?
We haven't had a discussion within the party on this. So I would say that Rahul Gandhi's statements in Parliament showing a great deal of sympathy for the southern states, for Tamil Nadu, for the Union of States idea, and so on, are a pointer suggesting that that's going to be an issue on which he would feel a fair amount of sympathy for us. But I might add that if you look objectively at all of this, there is a real concern that this really is an issue that transcends party. Even if there are 5 different parties in power in the 5 different states of the South, which has been the case at one time. We have the CPM in Kerala, we have DMK in Tamil Nadu, we have Congress in Telangana. We have Congress again in Karnataka, but there was a time when BJP was in Karnataka, and we have a regional party with the YSR or TDP in Andhra. Even if you have 5 different parties on this issue, I believe the 5 state governments are capable of making common cause, because this is something that affects them all, and it affects them all beyond party. That's my personal view. As I said, we've not discussed it within the Congress party, though it's a discussion that will be necessary.
So I'll just end by asking you that you spoke about the Rajya Sabha, which perhaps acts like a US Senate. In between, you did suggest about decentralization. What are the different options that we can look at instead of the delimitation, which we expect will happen now, where the Lok Sabha will go up to 840 seats almost?
Yeah, so that I think is going to be a laughable situation, because I don't think such a Lok Sabha would be meaningful in terms of functioning, especially with the BJP's fondness for reducing the number of sessions, reducing the number of days, privileging everything else but the actual discussions in Parliament. I think an 880 seat Parliament or Lok Sabha would be a completely unproductive, ineffective thing, which would be purely declaratory which would just be used for as a notice board for the government. And of course, when the government has a comfortable majority, it'll be used as a rubber stamp. That's it. And that's I think the intention of those who want to pursue this approach is precisely that, which is why I worry so much for our democracy. So I would rather focus on some of the principles that need to be upheld. One is that you need uh, fair democratic representation, agreed. But you want to do it without disenfranchising any state or any region of the country. You want equitable redistribution of central taxes, but again, you want it without those who are contributing more and getting less feeling deprived. You want to ensure that no one region or one linguistic group has the power to make all decisions for the whole country. You must recognize the diversity and pluralism of India and ensure, therefore, that really people are in a position to have their voices heard in our democracy and in our system. And the way to do this can depend entirely on what the leaders of the time decide. One could be a constitutional amendment changing the nature of the composition of the Rajya Sabha. Another could be a constitutional amendment giving more decentralized authority to each individual state and leaving the center a limited role in defense, in foreign policy, in macroeconomy like currency management, in distribution of central revenues and foreign trade. You can have specific areas which only the central government can do and leave pretty much everything else to the states, in which case the states would not be worried about the consequences of the central government having that kind of authority. But all these imaginations are possible. You and I can sit down together and come up with 10 ideas. There are scholars who can think about these things, constitutional scholars who can come up with ideas. For me, the most important thing is that there should be a discussion, there should be a conversation, and there should be a solution. I had hoped in the article you referred to that the large number of regional parties in the NDA might actually bolster our federalism. But unfortunately, even when I wrote that article, I was concerned that they've just contented themselves with securing cabinet berths, and they didn't even insist on major ministries or pivotal ministries. They were far more interested in more perquisites for their own states. And I must say, the BJP got away with very, very little. Andhra Pradesh, they essentially said, we'll arrange a World Bank loan for you, but that'll add to your debt burden. And Andhra Pradesh said yes, whereas, as you know, the earlier TDP alliance with the BJP had foundered when the TDP said, you have to give us special status, you have to give us real money, you have to give us support for Polavaram, you have to give us money for the consequences of the separation from Telangana. And that's why they moved a no confidence motion against the BJP. Now they've swallowed their pride, cut their demands, and have accepted merely a loan, which they're going to have to repay. So I'm not quite sure if this is how sort of pussycat they're going to be inside the cabinet. I'm not sure that my hopes were at all warranted if they're not going to be standing up for their own interests beyond a certain point. If they think survival within the cabinet is their best guarantee of getting what they want, then they will not want to rock the boat. So I would rather go back to the thinking of the former Chief Minister of Gujarat, Mr. Narendra Modi, when he was Chief Minister, who was an unwavering federalist. He championed decentralized policy making. At that time, he opposed everything from the national intelligence grid to the GST proposal and the reform of direct tax of the central government. He basically said, in a country like India, there can never be a universal union-devised panacea for all our problems. Leave us to do our own things. We will innovate and tailor solutions, and we do better than other states. That was the Gujarat of Mr. Modi. Maybe he should now channel his inner chief minister and put himself in the shoes of other chief ministers and agree that that cooperative federalism really needs to be cooperative. And for that, real changes and a new imagination are really required.
Thank you, Mr. Tharoor. So the Federalist in Narendra Modi should make a comeback, and what we need is imagination to solve the problem. Thank you very much for explaining in detail to those watching on the News Minute and News Laundry. Before I wrap up, reminding everyone that at the News Minute we've been covering the South, but this time we're also covering the Maharashtra and Jharkhand elections. So do catch the election coverage, and thank you very much.